something like this is nuanced enough that I wish that what seems to be called for is like a carefully thought out position paper.
Mm.
Because as I'm talking in the moment now, I'm going to forget something and I'm going to not maybe articulate some nuance. But I'm hoping that when I talk about my background here, that what comes through is a sense of curiosity and compassion. Because this is just such a difficult topic, and a sense of compassion, not just for myself, but for people who are faced with um, questions about abortion, either from a personal point of view or from a political legislative point of view. These are
Yeah.
difficult topics. I am pro-choice, and I'm firmly pro-choice, and I want to explain what I mean by that and how I've arrived to that um, position. I was raised in a very conservative, religious, evangelical Christian church.
Okay.
So many of my family members and people that I went to elementary school, high school, college with are not pro-choice. And I probably wasn't initially also growing up. But in college, I happened to take a class from a guy, Jerry Winslow, who was actually writing the church's position on abortion, and he brought it to class as a kind of a rough draft. Um, and to see kind of a person with the authority to write a position statement made me think more about invulnerability with respect to position statements, that they're written by people. And I have since become a Quaker, um, been a Quaker for 20 or 30 years now. And religion is all wrapped up in abortion, obviously. And it's wrapped up in my position as well. My um, membership in the Society of Friends, my membership in Quakerism very much informs my position as pro-choice. Quakers believe that there's something of God in everybody, and that can be very much um, tied to autonomy. It can be tied to the sacred ability of a person to connect directly with a higher power for guidance and advice around difficult topics. And that my involvement with Quakerism has led me to believe that if there's something of God in everybody, then we need to respect each person's ability to reach important, sensitive, critical decisions like those around abortion. Uh, Having said that, I would never call myself pro-abortion. I think that life is sacred,
Mm.
and I wish that we could have a society where there were economic and political and other structures that made abortion as least likely as possible. There, that women felt supported, that families felt supported, so that women wouldn't choose abortion um, based on fears about taking care of babies and children. Um, I believe also that as women, we really need to have control over our medical decisions for our bodies. I wouldn't want my husband to make choices, medical choices for me. I wouldn't want my neighbor to do that either. I like him, but he doesn't have any business interfering with a medical decision that I make on any part of my body, perhaps especially my reproductive health, let alone legislators or politicians in some other state. Um, and what informed, as a professor who teaches ethics, I'm automatically drawn toward the biomedical principles of ethics. It's autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. And for many people, the interplay between those principles creates interesting discussion and interesting subsequent problems. We could ask, what's in the best, what decision would produce the most good for the mother, for the father, for the fetus? Which kind of decision would result in the least kind of harm, or the fairest decision for whom? For society, for mother, family, baby. And these biomedical principles don't automatically give us a blueprint for what's right or wrong, but they can demonstrate that questions like this can be incredibly fraught and confusing and difficult and when we talk about therapeutic versus non-therapeutic abortion, viability versus non-viability of a fetus, who gets to decide if autonomy or consent trumps beneficence or non-malfeasance. And I believe that there are enough good, rational, strong, ethical people who can disagree on this topic. They can disagree on when an abortion should or shouldn't take place, if ever. And because enough reasonable, good, rational, smart people can disagree, that makes me pro-choice. It makes me say, I will not dictate what somebody else's choice is because you may have a different choice than mine. I would advocate for as few abortions as possible and as many happy, healthy pregnancies and childhoods and adults as possible. But I also would advocate for every woman being given the autonomy over her own body to decide when and if she becomes a mother, with contraceptives or with abortions. And that line gets more and more fuzzy and more like, where does it stop between viability versus non-viability or therapeutic versus non-therapeutic? Those questions are confusing. But again, enough people who are smart can disagree, and that makes me pro-choice because I need to recognize that smart people can disagree with me and that it should be left up to a very sensitive discussion between medical provider and mother. So let me just see if I missed anything. Goodness, there's just so much. There's so many confusing things. I mean, we can go for, when does life begin, or when is it murder? If you clearly have a fetus who's viable, is it automatically murder? Is contraception murder because you're preventing life? With technology advancing, with frozen embryos, what are the rights of the embryos to grow up into people? And is it murder to have frozen embryos that you discard because you don't want to implant them all, or because there's been a divorce or a separation? I mean, they're just incredibly difficult, challenging conversations that need to be had, but they need to be had with compassion, and with a sense of curiosity about how another person arrives at their decision, and what the implications are for not only personal decisions but societal level decisions. There's so much more to talk about, but there's a few minutes in a nutshell of what I've come up with. Is there anything about what I've said just now, Elizabeth, that you'd like clarification on, or that was not clear? I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but is there anything that you want to know more about, or that I could try to make more clear?
No, I think I don't think we disagree necessarily on any of these topics. I do want to say that I'm at I didn't want to move while you were talking, but my phone is dying, so I need to kind of go get a charger.
Well, while you're talking, I forgot one point.
Okay, keep going.
And my point was something else that's really informed my kind of arrival to this position of being pro-choice has been traveling and living in different countries, seeing different kinds of societal level ethical frameworks. Has made me or encouraged me to believe that those things are not set in stone, that they can be chosen. And the last one was becoming a mother myself, being a pregnant person, and having other friends who have become pregnant, maybe just growing older in general, just makes me all that much more aware of what I don't know. And I'm less strident about the few things that I think I do know. It's such an interesting task to take something as complicated as abortion and say, all right, tell you my position in 5 minutes. Like, that's impossible, but
yeah,
important to come up with the self-reflection or self-awareness of, well, why do I believe that? I mean, what has led me to believe this way? And that in itself is a valuable exercise.
Well, and whatever you do choose to come up with in those 5 minutes, it shouldn't be impossible to listen to that and to take that for what it's worth. It's not like who gets to tell you that you have to make it 20 minutes or a half an hour or 2 days, you know. It's
Right.
your position. So
Right.
who else can tell you your position on that?
It's just like the examples are, what about if she's 14 and this, or it's a sexual assault under these circumstances, or they're married. Like, you can always come up with like micro positions on very specific examples, and I think that's part of what makes this such a hard topic, is you can always come up with some kind of exception to what you've just said that makes what you just said not as correct, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. The whataboutisms are very strong just about in every polarized topic. But it makes
Right.
that's the things you can slam somebody with on Twitter,
Right.
retweet and quote it, and well, what about when this, or that's when people quote things people even said themselves 5 years ago or whatever
That's
it is.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you can take snippets that make a person look really bad or really uncaring or unfeeling.
Right. Okay. Well, I think Elizabeth, we're at that time where if you want to go through your position and how you got there, we will just listen to you for a second.
Sure. So I don't necessarily disagree with anything Breyette says. And I think that it's a little bit odd to have this pro-choice, pro-life binary choice system when Breyette just listed about 30 different scenarios that could be that you might differ on and still consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice. And there are just so many different shades of what it could mean to you. And again, we talked about, I guess, our backgrounds. And I think for me, what affected my view was I saw a sign that a woman was holding at a pro-choice rally once, and it was a common refrain, and they've made T-shirts of this. It's something like, if men could get pregnant, then abortions would be free and legal and safe. And I kind of thought, I don't really believe that, because I think if men could get pregnant, no one would want an abortion. I think we would have created a culture where men would be able to give birth and have maternity leave and have paid off childcare, and would have strong family structures, and would support even a teenage pregnant person or accidental pregnancy, so that they wouldn't have to do this. So I'm Chinese, and Chinese people are, China is very well known for its one-child policy. So abortion is rampant, and Chinese people tend to be very, very permissive about abortion. And because of the one-child policy and the traditional favoring of male, of sons, millions, tens of millions, I don't know exactly how many, of little baby girls were aborted in favor of sons. And now my parents obviously moved to America, but it was their generation. So of the people of my generation, there are far fewer women than there are men. And it's caused all sorts of problems. And I think what I see in this society is not necessarily, that abortion was bad or anything, but that here's a society where abortion is legal and relatively safe, and society accepts it, and women aren't better. They're not better off. The women are still constricted. I mean, it's not that they're forced to abort their daughters. Obviously, the one-child policy has all sorts of things. This is that's a whole nother podcast right there. But it didn't. The permissive abortion attitude, to me, was not what we should be striving for. I think that in some ways, when we think, oh, let's. I saw a terrible movie recently where this woman gets pregnant accidentally, and many of the characters say, well, you're pro-choice, so you should abort the child. And without any regard to whether she wanted the kid, I mean, she was very well off. And even though it was an accident, and I don't think that this is true of pro-choice people, I do think that it kind of shortcuts the idea that if we get to abortion, we'll have better equality. And I don't think that's true. I think we need to me, being pro-life is we need to work towards making life the choice. And I don't believe in reducing abortion rights necessarily legally through legislation, but I do believe that we should be putting all our efforts into making life as viable and as appealing a choice as possible, and supporting women who may not have the opportunities, so that if there's a reason that she's getting abortion, and that reason is I don't have the money, or I don't feel prepared, or I'm going to have so much social stigma, this is not the right time. Like, I don't think that we should be, it's been, over 50 years since Roe v. Wade, and that we're fighting for a woman's right to, that we're fighting for women who don't have options, just fighting for her right to abort her child. To me, seems like we have failed her, and to me that it seems like we're kind of letting ourselves off the hook. So I definitely think that, right now we don't have anything. We haven't made a culture that values women and gives them options. To me, this is not, it's not a choice. If you can't, it's either destitution with a baby or destitution without a baby. And I know that, as we talked a little bit about whataboutism, and I know that certainly people on the pro-life side can seem really callous. And I know a lot of people will say they're not really trying to help women. They're really about controlling. And I can understand that. Certainly a lot of legislation is poorly written, and does not take into account lots of things, lots of situations. But to me, our direction, our emphasis should be on life. That's how I define my role.
Thank you for watching the Unity Now podcast. We'll be back with another conversation that highlights the political middle ground to unite Americans and end the ideological war. In the meantime, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and hit that subscribe button.